I will let them introduce themselves. So we'll start with Peter. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. And Dylan and Zprime, thanks for having me. My name is Peter Muhorro. I am the Chief Strategy, Technology, and Innovation Officer at Rappahannock Electric Cooperative. REC is one of the largest co-ops in the nation. We power parts of 22 counties in the Commonwealth of Virginia, approximately 18,000 miles of line over a 4,000 square mile territory. We currently serve about 173,000 consumers throughout our territory, with a good mix of both commercial, industrial, and residential, but primarily residential. And I'm looking forward to the conversation as we get into this and the role that utilities play.
Yeah, we're happy to have you, Peter. We also have Suzanne on the call here today.
Hi, Dylan. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Suzanne Russo. I'm the CEO of Pecan Street Inc. We are a nonprofit research and development organization based in Austin, Texas. I've got my bat earrings on today. I don't know if you guys can see those representing the Bat City. We do work around the country helping to address data gaps and product development and testing gaps to overcome a lot of the challenges we're facing with climate change, and specifically focusing primarily in the area of distributed energy resources and clean energy in the residential sector. Looking forward to the conversation today.
Awesome. Thank you for the Austin shout out. I mean, I work at Zprime. I don't live in Austin, so that's a little stolen valor to accept that, but it happened.
We'll let you take it.
Yeah, exactly. We're all right. We also have Hala here.
Right. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with this panel and with you. I am the president and CEO of Electric Power Engineers with over 30 years consulting in the electric power and energy industry. Myself, I've been an advisor and leader nationally and internationally in the integration of renewables and technology and resources into the grid, as well as smart grid development. Just for the audience to know me a little bit, I did have an early vision and understanding of where we are today about 15 years ago. And that's what I built Electric Power Engineers around, which is a consulting company with over 150 people, with 120 of them power systems focused. The goal was and continues to be there for the industry, the utilities, the stakeholders, in solving that holistic transmission, distribution, grid integration of all the technology generation and distributed energy resources, as well as the software development. So I have spun out of Electric Power Engineers, NRI.ai, which is energy intelligence, to support that urgent need to integrate smart cities and smart grids. Together, we serve electric utilities, cities and municipalities, renewable, other generation developers, as well as technology developers, to build the integrated grid of the future. Excited for this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, and we're happy to have you. So yes, thank you all for being on to have this discussion. Since we're talking about the role of utilities, I will start with the co-op. So Peter, how does your organization view itself in relation to your service territory? You laid out that you have over 100,000 customers. You operate in like 22 counties in Virginia. So is your focus solely on making sure that there's reliable power brought to these customers, and that's the end of it, or do you see yourself having additional roles and responsibilities in your communities?
Dylan, great question. And proud to have said I've spent a majority of my career with electric cooperatives in different capacities. And one of the interesting parts about a cooperative is really a part of the community, right? And so we're not-for-profit, member-owned utility. So we view our engagement with our consumers highly from a perspective of being collaborative and being together as a partner and not just a power company. Now, let me be clear, we do have a mission to provide affordable, reliable, safe, and sustainable energy to our consumers. And that is always going to be the top priority of what we do. But we view ourselves as how do we partner with all our consumers, both on the residential side and as we look at even on the commercial and industrial. I'll give a good example of some of the things that we're doing. Just recently, a few months ago, we introduced a new brand of energy solutions called Vividly Brighter. And that was one thing that, it was us hearing from our consumers saying, help us figure out how to do electric vehicles, help us figure out how to, add more renewables into, from a residential side and even from a CNI side. And so, we work together with our consumers to say, what would be the answer that we provide? And together we're able to put that together. That's just an example of how we're constantly viewing ourselves as a partner in the community, working with every stakeholder you could think about. I spend a lot of time in county meetings with board of supervisors as we look at economic development. How do we work together? In fact, in some areas we happen to be the facilitator and the enabler. I will give another example. It's a little bit different than just thinking a power company, reliable power. We're through soft parts of rural Virginia that do not have broadband, and while we specifically did not want to be an ISP, we decided to do what we call, I have coined it as middle mile plus, where in some parts of our territory, we're building fiber all the way to the home on our infrastructure, but we've partnered with an ISP and they'll be the ISP provider. So we lease the fiber to them. They provide the services. In other areas, we're leasing dark fiber that we own to different entities and different partners. And in other parts of it is the traditional pole attachments to look at fiber. That's just another example of how we collectively work together with our communities to make sure we're a partner, we're building on it, and not just as a power company that just provides reliable power.
Thank you for laying that out. That's some good groundwork. And yeah, the partnership aspect, I think, is it's definitely central to a co-op, and it's becoming more of a reality for utilities across the board. So Suzanne, in your work with Pecan Street's research and laboratories, I'm sure you've seen a lot of developments in regards to smart cities, tech service programs. So in regards to the processes and the role that utilities have in smart cities, how are you seeing that ecosystem change?
Yeah, well, in a lot of the ways that Peter was describing, as we move towards greater integration of information technology in the electricity sector, but also in all of the sectors that cities operate and manage, particularly in relation to decarbonization, right? So electrifying transportation and creating smarter mobility networks, fully electrifying buildings and creating smarter, more equitable and inclusive demand response programs. Electricity utilities are increasingly becoming the backbone of all of those services. And a lot of our strategies to enable us to mitigate climate change and to adapt to the effects of climate change in our communities, right? So what we've seen is utilities are becoming smarter about how they do that. And the path to enable the rest of the city, therefore, in our climate change goals to become smarter, is to integrate the utility more and more into all of these conversations that are happening at the community level. So we need our utilities and our transportation agencies to be partnering much more closely as we move forward and develop strategic plans and address procurement and electric reliability and transportation reliability, because those will become the same thing. We find that our utilities in a lot of these rural communities where we're working are also becoming the broadband internet services provider, or they're trying to avoid having to go into that business, but they've got to build out that broadband fiber network for their own operations because it's data driven now. And so thinking about what are the partnerships to ensure that the full community benefits from those utility investments. So it's a big focus on partnerships around electric utilities, but also increasingly integrating the electric utility into a lot of decisions that are outside of their traditional domain, so that we can really have smart integrated cities and smart systems level decision-making when it comes to climate change.
So on the strategic side, Hala, when your utility clients are looking at getting involved with, smart city initiatives and such, what are their priorities and reasons for doing so? And then how do you guide them through that landscape?
So the utility clients, if you want the electric utility clients, because we do also work with cities, if we're talking about the electric utility, their number one concern always remains to be reliability, economics, and equity. And these are the first things they think about when there are initiatives, whether it's they're involved in it and passionate about it, or whether it's something that the city is bringing on. In that perspective, they come and ask, the first thing they want to know, how are they going to integrate electric vehicles on the grid? How are they integrate the change in load patterns that are happening due to these technologies? Their role is super important because they're going to be powering these technologies which we're going to be depending on. If you think about it, it's almost mirroring the internet, which we all depend upon, right? For everything we do. So it's becoming like that. And beyond that, they're also, this is recent in the last year or so, we're starting seeing that they are realizing, not that they don't know, but they're at the point where they need to work with other infrastructure, right? So how do I coordinate with the transportation even, or the water, or the gas, or other stakeholders in the industry? And that's where we also come in and try to go beyond just the technical and help them understand the roles of each, and how co-locating infrastructure development will impact them and impact the economics, reliability, resiliency of their systems.
And you said you also, work with the cities directly as well. So how do they, I guess just as a baseline setting, how do they view the utility as in regards to as being a key stakeholder there? How do they go about interacting with utilities, and how do they integrate them more into that process?
May I just say, there is no one answer fits all. There are cities that can really work with the utilities. They've worked before. There are cities where you see it's really very hard to collaborate. So there is the human political even factor, which later on I want to really talk about, because we need to understand that. So different places view it differently. They all understand they need to work together, but the level of effort put into integrating the utility is not always there with some cities, and some other cities who have been for a while working on integrating electric vehicles, working with different, let's say, innovative public transportation or trains. They have figured it out before, and it's easy to work with them. But we're coming a little closer in that integration between the two.
That's good to hear. So yeah, when we're talking about that human element, Peter, for most of us, especially those with traditional munis or IOUs for utilities, the main way of interacting with our utility is paying a bill, right? And that comes with stresses and frustrations, which is one of numbers of reasons that people can tend to disapprove of utilities. So how can utilities form closer bonds with community members and build relationships? And how, co-ops are very much leading in those fields because they're community owned, but even for the utilities that aren't, how can they better strategize?
Absolutely. And before I touch on that question, I did get a chat message asking me about Power Source. We're a distribution utility in Virginia. We are a 35% owner of Old Dominion Electric Cooperative, which is a generation and transmission co-op, where we get about 95% of our power from them. ODEC is one of the few GNTs that have actually issued a carbon zero goal by 2050 and 50% reduction by 2030. And so working towards being carbon neutral today, majority of it is gas, nuclear, and a good portion bought on the market. Coal continues to decline, and in fact, very little coal that's left in their portfolio. So for folks who are curious about the power source, that's who we buy our power from. Now, to address your question, the reality of it is, as a utility, interacting with the consumer, you get two calls. One is, why is my bill so high? And two, when are my lights gonna come back on? That's the bottom line of the interactions that exist as a utility. So we now have to take the opportunity to reach out to our consumers. And one of the things we do not do well is we don't communicate well. And when we try to communicate, we botch it. You can see some of the utilities just recently with the heat waves, and the communication just wasn't there, so you lose your consumers. Every utility has to really think about how you communicate with your consumers and engage them. And partly is bringing in some tools, bringing in some stakeholder engagement and reaching out to them. I'll give you a good example. Earlier this year, we launched a program called Vividly Brighter Upgrades, and that is an energy efficiency program that we will help finance all those measures on your electric bill. And the goal is that you would reduce your energy bill by about 20%. So essentially, someone does not see the difference on the electric bill, but there's a reduction in the energy usage. Well, prior to launching that, we went through a whole stakeholder engagement. And in fact, we're going to do 3. We are regulated, and we wanted to show the commission that we've done some stakeholder engagement. We ended up doing 4 sessions, and they brought in a lot of folks who are engaged. Those folks really love it and now have become our champions, talking about the programs to other folks. That's one way you can think about how you engage it. The other way is really providing usable information to consumers. The problem we do as utilities is we provide a lot of information, but it's not what you could use. And so how do you make it fundamentally easy for someone to use? For example, later this year, early next year, we'll be integrating a CIS system digitally, which is a data disaggregation platform. And so what I want is every consumer, when they get on their mobile app, they can see how their usage actually goes, because today it's a vacuum to them. They just know I have lights, but they don't know what usage is what. And so if they could see, well, actually, why is my stove using this much electricity? Are you really, as I talked to someone not too long ago, they've used their stove for heating because they thought it was cheaper than using actual heat. And, but all of a sudden you're providing tangible information that they could use. That's really the only way you begin to engage with your consumers on really a relational perspective, and not just a one way to just say, hey, my electric bill is this way. Those programs that you create as a utility, you have to find a way to get them to the right folks to begin with. Market segmentation has to be key. Secondly, how you communicate it has to be a real big priority. And that's the way I could see the engagement happening.
Yeah, and there's, I'm sure, lots of fun tools to be able to help disseminate that information and such. One thing that I've been thinking about is how in relationship to how the utility transformation and the city transformation is that they're both fundamentally data driven, like you said earlier, Suzanne, and they're people driven as well, because it's all about the end user. So Suzanne, how do cities and service providers leverage data to improve communities?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways that we could leverage more data, and I think leverage data better to improve our communities. From the utility perspective, again, Peter's touched on a lot of the things that I would have as well. it's really trying to help your providing more information to customers so that they can make decisions and they feel informed about how to manage their utility bill. They also feel that there's information available to them about different programs and opportunities that they could take advantage of or apply for from the utility, but also from other city sectors or like county sectors, county service providers. What we found in doing a lot of our community work, particularly here in Austin, is that the utility does have contact with most residents, even if it's just through a bill, but it's a known entity and there is a pathway for contact. And so when we look at how do we get smarter about helping deliver services to households, a part of that is how do we help households get smarter about taking advantage of available resources and services? And that's a communication challenge. A lot of households we found in research we've even been doing this year here in Austin, a lot of our households within Austin Energy Service Territory don't know about the programs that are available to them, whether it's just information about solar, rooftop solar, what benefits can that provide? How do I select a contractor? All the way to programs that they would be eligible for that provide a direct benefit like weatherization or energy efficiency or home safety retrofit programs. And the utility can serve as a really important conduit for access to information about all of those programs. And again, they're a trusted resource. So it's figuring out where do we have communication gaps and then how do we better close them with access to information and data for our customers. And then back on the utility side, really taking advantage of data that's available or that can be available through smart meters and other kinds of smart city sensors. Again, to understand where we can better direct resources to improve our communities. Where do we have a lot of traffic congestion? Where do we have communities that seem to have a very high energy intensity rate? So they're using a higher amount of energy per square foot than the average household. So that's a place where we want to then go and target for education and awareness around weatherization or energy efficiency programs. Pecan Street collects a lot of data through sensors that we install within households. It's a huge amount of data. We get billions of data points per day from several hundred homes. So that's way more data than an average utility can or should be trying to deal with out of each household. But we can aggregate that up to get much better insights into things like in our community, if we're going to be incentivizing rooftop solar on homes, do we want that solar to face south or west? Where do we want to be achieving the best reductions in energy demand for costs for our whole community and for decarbonization? So for example, in Austin, we helped a group of households, a couple of hundred homes, put on west-facing solar at a time when rebates mostly required you to get south-facing solar because south-facing solar will produce more energy throughout a year. But our problem really is peak grid use, right? That's when we see rolling brownouts and rolling blackouts. That's when we have our dirtiest, most expensive power come onto the grid, particularly in the summer. West-facing solar reduced that peak grid draw from homes onto the grid by about 70%, whereas south-facing solar was a fraction of that. It was about 40%. So we were able to use that data to help create better, more effective policies at the utility around how we structure incentives and rebates for things like rooftop solar, things like electric vehicles, smart thermostats. So there's a lot of ways that we can be using data that are under-tapped resources, particularly as more homes adopt these kinds of smart technologies like smart thermostats that provide a lot of data if we take advantage of it as an organization or a city. So I think both, it's helping get more information to customers in a way that they can understand it and take advantage of it. But it's also utilities taking advantage of data sets that are available to better understand their customer and better direct and utilize resources to achieve our broader city goals.
We've talked about a bit about the utility side. We talked about a bit about the data side. Hala, in what other ways is technology enabling a greater role for utilities?
Okay, this is a good topic. So I speak a little longer here. The technology, aside from powering it, as I said earlier, which is a very important role. I mean, imagine all the smartness and we can't power it, then our systems will fail. And by the way, that's what keeps me up at night when I worry about imagining all these technologies working and automation and demand response and all of that, and you've got to keep the power on. But the technologies themselves are what is allowing the utilities to be able to do that, or actually will allow them to do that. Examples are smart meters. We've always had them, but now the two-way communication has gone to a next level. This is how we will be able to communicate with the customers in the future. We're seeing designs of those smart meters or systems on top of the smart meters where you can actually send complicated instructions. We expect that you'll be able to send an instruction to their washing machine to turn on at 2 a.m. when the power usage, and something in the past we thought we will never get to. We're preparing to do that. Other is the ability to load shed. For example, we're working with the utility at Electric Power Engineers to say, hey, why aren't we using the communications through the devices at the consumers to actually shed load, like what happened in Texas in the snowstorm. Instead of shedding feeders at a time and having people outage all the time, now we can provide more resiliency through this technology to enable the utility itself to work with the consumers and keep the schools, keep the critical fire station on and the hospitals, while alternating less time out to the customers. And that's necessary as we skim the system. Who is going to help control and plan how the EVs, the electric vehicles, are going to be utilized as we go into this technology being call it pushed onto our system, and the customers want it? How are we going to send the instructions? How are we going to communicate and control? How are we going to forecast? So a lot of technologies, whether it's control systems in order to do that, whether it is software to do that, whether it is massive data handling systems, because we're going to need this smart to process all this huge amount of data in order to do that intelligently. All of these things are on the utility right now. Beyond that, some utilities are expanding their role into, hey, we want to control the smart inverters on your solar rooftop to keep the quality on the system. We will manage your EVs. We actually will install your solar panels and help the system stay more reliable. And again, at the end, I know you probably will ask us how the future look like. It all depends on how far the utility wants to go, but they are positioned to extend their role even further.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Hala. So that made me think, Suzanne, I know Pecan Street is collecting data on like soil health and agriculture. So while we're kind of talking about possibilities here, can you talk a bit about how that research ties in with the connected communities conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. It's along a similar line of, let's take advantage of the new information channels and pathways that do exist, right? So we've got cellular coverage pretty much everywhere in this country. We've got a lot of low-cost sensors that are being developed and that are available with great apps for individuals to use, but also, for APIs for entities to aggregate data and get really useful insights out of the information that those sensors collect at individual farm or home level. So what we're trying to do in the soils agriculture space is take this framework we've developed around residential energy and water use and electric transportation, where we combine a research model that's very data driven and data heavy with community driven needs and interests. We talked a little bit before this panel, Dylan, about when should utilities or cities use data streams to help make better decisions or to help with operations, and when do you really need to have a face-to-face conversation with somebody? So Pecan Street tries to combine those two things. The value of data is you get much more granular insights that you can scale much more quickly across communities. But you have got to pair that with conversations with individuals so that you make sure you're understanding the data and you understand the experience, because that's the only way you can use data to create solutions that work. So we're trying to carry that into the agricultural sector now, which is the most underinvested area for research of all of our natural sciences, but also underinvested in as an economic and a climate solution for our country. there's not a lot of sensor development that's happened to help us better understand soils. So in the way that we now understand energy and electricity and the different factors associated with high quality, reliable, affordable power in a community, because we have a lot of data coming off of utility lines. We have a lot of data coming off of vehicles and homes now. Smart inverters provide a massive amount of data about renewable performance. We're missing a lot of that picture when it comes to farms and soil. But similarly, soil is a very important resource for us in the way that power is, right? We need food, we need soil to grow food. And we also think that soils are probably the most under-leveraged climate change solution that we have available to us right now. We've depleted most of the carbon that exists in our soils through unsustainable farming practices. Soils are ready to reabsorb that like a sponge, but we're missing data to prove out the ways to do that in different land management practices. We need that data so that we can get that financial investment to help farmers farm in a different way and make data-informed decisions about how they manage their land. So that's the space Pecan Street is working in, is trying to figure out how can we get more sensors created more quickly to help farmers have better information about their soil, and then to also make that data available to big decision makers like philanthropists and the USDA. But also, how can we create solutions that will help farmers adapt to extreme weather events, that help them feel equipped and empowered to make decisions about different tools and practices and markets that are available to them. So it's moving back into that nexus of people and data for better communities.
Thanks for that. I think it's interesting that you guys are looking into that. There's some interesting data sets. I guess so. Bringing it back to the smart city ecosystem. One thing I'm sort of I've sort of picked up on from the discussion we've had so far today is that, like, the amount that a utility can be involved with city services outside of just providing power, it can differ based on the nature of the utility, the city, the community, just the service territory in general. But I think there are some, because the ecosystem's changing, there are maybe some good rules of thumb for how to navigate this landscape as a utility, or even potentially as a city. So I'm going to open up the floor here to anyone who has any good rules of thumb for how to be a good partner in smart city development. If anyone has a good idea off the top of their head, they can take it away first.
I can try, then more on the high level side and open up the thought process. Open mind is important. Thinking holistically is important. So like you said, it's true. Some utilities are more involved with more landscape than others. Let's talk about an ideal situation, which we go back to the traditional vertically integrated everything. It would be easy if the utility had the communication, the broadband that's going to communicate with the customers, if they were on top of where the charging stations will be, the mobility, the electricity, and all of those things. But being it not the case, the most important thing that the utility can do is find avenues and, in my opinion, and push towards structure that allows them to enables them to do that. Because the hardest thing that a utility can and needs to do is to worry about something outside its day-to-day business, something that is not clear how it's going to bring revenue and not clear whose responsibility it is. So it seems to me like we need other bodies to kind of, people will hate me, to regulate, but in a way to, we have a public utility commission to help us decide what to do. We need that sometimes, although not all the time it's perfect. Let's not get into politics, but we need that because it's very hard. You've got different people, different day-to-day activities, people meaning companies, and we need that. I think this is what the utilities and the cities and all the different stakeholders need to say, how do we set, where's the responsibility, and what does the big picture look like?
And I'll chime in and build on what Hala said, and I'll just get a little bit more practical. One of the things that done before and looked at right now is, and I could speak mostly primarily looking at rural America, as you travel through all these small towns and you tend to find a lot of them, for example, their water systems are ran very manually. They still have meter readers. They do everything off an Excel spreadsheet. And part of it is that it's a small tax base. They're not going to be able to get, it's a municipality owned water system. So part of what we've done and kind of working on some interesting things is looking at how do we partner with them. We already have a system that can do all that, and we've essentially built a toll road, and anyone can now jump on it and drive on it. And so how do we partner on that and get to be able to automate their systems? In addition to that, if I'm doing my next rollout of my AMI, why not partner with them? It's not that different of meters, and it's the same folks who are selling the meters. So we're buying in bulk. So now we're working to help the city itself, for example, take advantage of economies of scale. And such a partnership, for example, is really what gets that ecosystem growing. Now, the challenges with it is there's a common phrase with electric utilities, Doug's, dumb old utility guys. We've always done it this way. We have to get out of that mindset, and you've very open-minded to say, let me challenge the status quo at looking at something different. And if I can, maybe I can find ways to bring some of these partnerships together. So thought I'd just give more of a practical example of how I envision, one of the ways I envision some of this.
And I'll add on, if that's okay, Dylan, from our perspective as a private sector entity that partners often with utilities, and we need utilities to partner with us for our work to have impact. What we see is often missing, both we're guilty of it, but also broadly just agency to agency within cities, is that utilities really are, the electric utility really is critical to almost everything we want to do right now around decarbonization and smart cities. But decisions are made on programs that seem to be outside of an electric utility domain, but do require them to partner. And then utilities are just told about that. And the electric utility is told, well, you need to go and figure out X, Y, and Z, rather than really have been brought in early to say, this is what we can do right now with the systems we have. This is what it would take for us to get to where you want to go to be able to enable that. So let's talk about how we pay for that. Let's talk about what that different staffing capacity looks like. And I think it's that early partnership, early conversation piece that really is going to be critical in enabling the transformations we want to see as cities to become really smart cities and sustainable cities. But also it's going to require moving away from the kind of traditional linear thinking that we see in most electric utilities and ISO grid operators to thinking exponentially about change and to thinking in scenarios. One example we're seeing a lot is when we talk about climate change and how do we forecast load growth and how do we figure out where those resources are going to come from if we're meeting decarbonization goals. A lot of that forecasting still uses 10-year average weather data, and it presumes maybe an incremental year-over-year increase in temperature. But that's not what Pecan Street's data shows. We've got very granular data for the past 10 years of weather and energy use in Texas. Climate change isn't going to be a linear increase in our temperatures, a linear increase in global warming. Climate change is climate destabilization, and it's extreme weather events happening more frequently in different seasons that are unpredictable. And we really have to start thinking together, again, with utilities as the early partner and the backbone in these conversations about what's it going to take to actually service customers and grow.
I agree. Just chiming in here, you heard what we're all saying, and I think we need to say that louder. It's a lot of ask of the utilities, right? How are they going to partner and with who? It's not just the old-fashioned way that utilities, yes, utilities have the reputation is that we've always done it this way, but it's not just that. It's a huge system with a lot of set ways on how we're doing it, and you're asking them to change it. And what is the drive if they have to keep low rates to their customers, even if they want to fund a study that my company wants to do for them and to show how upgrading their communication and where the chargers could go and how does that affect their rate? Is their rate kilowatt hours going to be? That requires either a regulatory to say you have to do it, or you have to show me studies that show the alternatives, or a lot of money at the utility that somehow they get from somewhere, which allows them to do these things. Of course, some innovative utilities can do it. And what I want to say, I don't know if you're going to go to the point where you ask about the challenges the utilities have. If it is now, I would like to say some more things as an engineering firm. All right. So do you know that we have several utilities that don't have digital maps for all their system? They still have paper maps. Not every utility has smart meters or smart meters throughout their system. Not every utility understands or knows or has the software development capabilities to build systems to process, bring, integrate this data. Their systems are desperate and desperately in a situation of being siloed. Operations and planning are siloed. You've got data for consumer information, data for engineering, data for operations, so many tools out there. And you're asking, think forward to the future. How do you go from today to a place where we're assuming we have self-healing networks and all this data is coming in and we're getting the greatest forecast in 24 hours or, in 6 hours or 3 days, and we're sending instructions to all these AMIs, like I said earlier, and these control systems. How are we going to do that if we're not even digitized yet? So that is the biggest challenge for our utilities.
Excellent.
If I can let me build on that one, because that is exactly the challenges that exist. I mean, this is just the reality of it. And I'll be quick to say, for example, we just finished up transformer loading as we see what the impact on all our 94,500 transformers will be based on electric vehicle penetration. And I can tell you, it's a little bit scary when you look at what, it's a massive study that we conducted because we knew we we're going to need something like that to back up to go to the commission when we say, hey, these are the upgrades we need to make. But at the end of the day, what's different this time is that study was actually not ran under engineering, which is typically where it would be ran. It was ran under my group, data analytics, my data analytics folks. And that's not the traditional way of thinking. But all of a sudden, it was able to bring in from different perspectives, while traditionally it would have been in one silo under engineering. And so there's a lot of challenges that we're going to face. Some of it is, just systems that, they've worked well, and sometimes you don't want to touch it. You want it to, because it's working well, and it's like, not that knob, don't touch it. It's working well, but we'll also have to find a way to break down those silos to really be able to get there. So Hala calls out some very good challenges that are just the reality of, when I think of the 900 plus electric co-ops and the 2,000 plus munis out there. There's a lot that we still have to get to before we can we can really get there, and it's doable, but it's a realistic challenge.
It's a revolution. It's really a total change, and it will take years unless we unleash all of our powers on helping the utilities do that.
Excellent. Well, that brings us right to time. There's so much more we could talk about. There's a whole decentralization angle that we didn't quite get to. So much of there's a lot of fertile ground for further discussion about this ecosystem and the role utilities are going to have. And I'm sure we're going to be discussing that more in future City of the Future content, including in an upcoming panel. So first, let me thank you all, Peter, Suzanne, Hala. This is an amazing conversation about people and organizations and cities and data, and very happy to have had you all on here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Great.